Many Sonic games have been released that typically divide fans into one of two categories: fans who love the game and those who kinda hate it. Of course, nuance exists in this situation, but if you frequent online spaces and listen in on conversations, those are usually the things you'll hear. There are some games that people perceive as being objectively flawed, and others that have very mixed opinions. But there's just one game in particular that I just can't place that elicited mixed reactions from Sonic fans but was loved by non-fans, that game being Sonic Frontiers. Frontiers is surprisingly disliked by a lot of Sonic fans, and while some criticisms are valid, there are many misconceptions about the game that should be cleared up. Hey, it's Mana Plays Games, aka MPG. Today, my partner Jayrock will be joining me and talking about some misunderstandings regarding Sonic Frontiers. He has a crazy amount of hours in the game and understands it better than anyone I know, so I thought his input would be essential.
Hey, I'm Jayrock. We haven't been formally introduced, but I'm the guy who's been making all the 3D renders for the channel. I'm happy to be here and talk about Sonic Frontiers. It's a game that's a bit controversial, and I'm excited to get a chance to talk about why.
Oh boy. Anyway, with that said, we'll be going over how and why Frontiers is misinterpreted, but we'll also be bringing up imperfections the game has that may understandably frustrate players. So, if you're down for that, let's get started. Sonic Frontiers was released November 8th, 2022, and was divisive pretty much out the gate. Like I mentioned before, a lot of Sonic fans had very mixed opinions on Frontiers, regardless of how well received it was by casual or non-fans of the series. It was by no means a flawless game, but I do think some Sonic fans may have disliked the game for various reasons, some valid and some, well, we'll see. After playing the game for myself and talking to fellow Sonic fans, I think Jayrock and I were able to gauge that the game may be misunderstood. To start off, I want to express just how different Sonic Frontiers is from any other mainline Sonic game. Most of the games are very cut and dry and had a similar formula that seemed to stick for quite a while. Fans were accustomed to the linearity the games used to have, as players would travel from level to level with little to no interruption. Frontiers, however, is not very linear and wants players to prioritize exploration above all else. No other Sonic game was this open, or open world at all for that matter. The absolute closest a Sonic game has ever gotten to being open world was Unleashed, and that was released in 2008, 17 years ago. So, many fans may be trying to play the game the same as any other mainline Sonic game, and in Frontiers' case, it's not the easiest or the most enjoyable thing ever.
Like Nana said, Frontiers is a game that rewards players for their curiosity and exploration. If players decide only to go from waypoint to waypoint, then they'll get very annoyed and frustrated because they end up needing to backtrack a lot. Frontiers has you do objectives rather than complete a linear level, and these objectives are what move the game along. You can't progress without, let's say, finding a set amount of memory tokens or getting keys from cyberspace levels. You can explore each island in whatever way you want at the pace you want. There are cyberspace levels, which are traditional levels, but they have some of the worst 3D controls in the series, which is unfortunate because the level design for the most part is pretty good since it's taken from other games. More on that later though. I personally believe that a lot of Sonic fans in general are a bit stubborn about certain things. The best way to gauge why certain fans dislike Frontiers is to ask how they feel about other games in the franchise, such as Shadow Generations. If they love games like that but dislike Frontiers, then they may be too fixated on the linearity of most Sonic games and prefer the back-to-back fast-paced levels that previous games had. This may make it harder to give Frontiers a fair chance. If you're only trying to play the game like you would previous Sonic titles, then you won't have much fun with the game. What proves this further is that Sonic Frontiers was received pretty well by the general public, probably because non-Sonic fans have more experience with more diverse games. There are a lot of games like Frontiers that people have played before, such as Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, so their knowledge from those games translates over. Controls are also customizable and simple, which makes the game much easier to pick up than other Sonic games. It's a bit alienating for non-Sonic fans or casuals to play a Sonic game when it's exclusively catering to just Sonic fans, which is why games like Generations, Colors, and Unleashed are all perceived differently within the fandom and among the general public. On the flip side, a loud minority of Sonic fans hate Frontiers, and it's mainly because of their toxic attachment to Sonic. They're always begging for change, but whenever something changes, they're the first to complain about it. Amy is a big example of this because he was hated during the 2000s for being super annoying and being obsessed with Sonic, but after they changed her in recent years to make her calmer, smarter, and generally cooler, people complain that she's super boring now. Instead of giving Frontiers a fair chance, they immediately compare it to what they want from Sonic, which immediately changed their view of the game. Of course, it's perfectly fine for a game not to be your cup of tea, but I feel as though Frontiers catches a little too much flack just because it changes the formula.
To piggyback off of what Jayrock said, Frontiers differs a lot from traditional Sonic games. I don't think I'll ever be able to reiterate that enough. Fans might have some misconceptions right off the gate about how to play the game due to their pre-existing expectations like exploring and completing objectives. From my perspective, I like to play these types of games on hard mode. Not literally, but I will go out of my way not to explore just because I'm kinda lazy. This game made it pretty difficult for me to do that, so I just didn't, and did exactly what was expected of me while still going about completing things like I wanted. It has a good bit of content and things don't feel dull, and I had fun just doing what I wanted because the game gave me a surprising amount of autonomy. I was making my own fun because I had the time and resources to do so. Frontiers gives you a certain level of freedom to do what you want, but what you do will affect your playthrough for better or for worse. Even when I came to the conclusion I needed to play differently in order to have a better experience, I never felt like my hand was forced, nor was I annoyed. I know I made the game harder on myself by not exploring as much as I could, and that gave me a new perspective on Frontiers and how other people may have seen it. I talked to two of my friends who both said they find the game boring or too big, and I can definitely understand that sentiment. I was awfully intimidated by Frontiers at first. It's by far the biggest, widest Sonic game I've ever played, and I was terribly anxious about constantly getting lost. The game may be huge and seems daunting, but I feel like giving it a fair chance is important. Fans have a hard time accepting something new, which I understand, but I don't really get it. Do we not want Sonic to grow and improve as a game series? I originally thought the game being so unique and different was a flaw until I played the whole thing for myself. You're entitled to your opinion if you disagree, of course. I suppose it's all about preferences. The game just may not be for a lot of people, but I found myself adapting at a decent pace, and if I can adapt to the game, well, not to self-deprecate, but anyone can. There's some real meat outside of levels, and I was quite surprised on how much there was to do that really affected my playthrough. For example, finding these question-marked signs and completing the puzzle that comes with them unlock more of your map. It makes it a lot less stressful to traverse when you know where you're going and where things are. It's not something you can do while actively avoiding anything other than maybe cyberspace levels and waypoints. Like I said, there's a good bit of freedom that Frontiers gives you that I think a lot of people either miss or don't care to take advantage of.
For instance, fans have a lot of misconceptions about Frontiers. I wouldn't say it's their fault most of the time. The game sometimes briefly explains a topic that's pretty important or fails to mention it entirely. Sometimes players are expected to understand important gameplay information with less than stellar briefings on how it works, like Big's fishing pond. It can be used to avoid almost any part of the game, but many players may not understand this because it's not explicitly stated, and some players can even go the entire game without even seeing it. The game gives you the tools necessary to play it how you want without too much frustration, but just doesn't explain those things very well. Of course, this isn't always the game's fault. There is a mix of the game not explaining itself well and players not taking in information correctly, which causes a lot of issues during gameplay. For instance, Nana had a few misconceptions about how the parry mechanic worked and the general gameplay loop.
Yeah, I know. No need to rub it in.
Anyway, I don't think I have to explain how a game can become unfun if the player doesn't fully understand how it works. It's not always the fault of the player, but it's not always the fault of the game either.
Moving on, another common complaint about the game is that it's lifeless, empty, and kinda boring. Honestly, it actually felt like there was too much to do sometimes. I never once felt bored or like nothing was happening. There was always something to find. Again, the game always seemed huge to me, but with its size came limitless potential regarding things to do. Rather than some players making the game more frustrating for themselves by not exploring, they could also make it horrifically boring to the point where it feels lifeless.
I'll admit that the game is lifeless, but that's the entire point of the game. You're exploring abandoned islands where an entire population of people used to live on, so it makes sense that no one is around except for Sonic's friends. This complaint only works when trying to compare the game to other titles. And as for it being dull, I'll admit that the terrain definitely could have been more interesting like Sonic Lost Worlds, but the game wants to be calming for the most part. It's supposed to make you curious and ask questions about the world. It's more similar to Breath of the Wild in that way. As for the game being boring, the game requires you to explore and make your own fun at times. If you choose to play the game in a linear way, then you won't have much fun at all. The story, on the other hand, can be a bit boring, as it isn't like other typical Sonic games, where there's a lot of accents or jokes thrown in, but again, it's going for a calmer, more mysterious story.
Speaking of the story, I think it's good. We're not going to say much about the events, but it feels natural enough. Maybe it's a bit on the nose at times, but it's a lot better than what we've gotten pre-2022. One thing I think confuses me a little are people who criticize the characterization of certain characters. I can understand some qualms about it, but even that's kind of far-fetched and blown way out of proportion. Amy's characterization has unfortunately been a hot topic for a while, and even her portrayal in Frontiers gets unfairly hated on. I think the characters have just grown. They're not necessarily acting out of character. Amy's arc on Kronos Island is simple but sweet, and I think it fits her very well even if she's a little dull. She still has moments of passion, maybe not nearly as exaggerated as before, but it's relatively harmless.
Like Nana said, the characterization in the game is good. Amy could have and should have been explored more, but in general, it's inoffensive. A lot of fans also felt like the references were annoying, out of place, or not necessary, but I believe they were, as previous games barely referenced anything that came before. For example, Tails' arc was a bit of a mixed bag for some people. It just seemed as though people wanted Tails to do more in Forces, but were a bit upset with him for referencing Infinite and his inactivity during the game. Frontiers generally has references to other games too, and that helps the game feel a lot more connected and like events actually happened, even if it may alienate some casual fans. Without the references, the games feel more episodic and less impactful. It makes sense for them to be there, and I can see how some references are a bit forced, but in general, it felt very validating as a longtime Sonic fan to finally hear that previous games actually mattered.
To conclude, despite being misunderstood by some players in very many ways, Frontiers isn't perfect. There are a few complaints that are pretty universal that may block the game from getting all its flowers, and justifiably so. So, let's talk about it. While Frontiers is very misunderstood, there are plenty of valid complaints that players have and cannot be excused. To start, while cyberspace levels offer more traditional gameplay for those who might miss it, they aren't impressive. There's some jank in the game sometimes that I'll go into later, but a lot of it is in the cyberspace levels. These levels are actually well designed for the most part, which makes it even more frustrating that they're weird to control. I think they should have ported some of the controls and physics from the open world into cyberspace. It probably would have made it more enjoyable. Because cyberspace levels feel weird and slow to control, if you only want to play these levels, you won't have that much fun. Some things just aren't responsive, and it's easy to sign yourself off the map due to lack of control. It's not awful or anything, I was still able to get a good bit of enjoyment out of it. Even so, since cyberspace levels and their completion requirements give you the keys necessary to move on, it definitely is a bit hard to get used to.
To add on to that, the controls in cyberspace feel very stiff compared to other titles. So going into it after experiencing the physics of previous games or even the normal open world is a huge downgrade. Other objectives in the game aren't too great to play either. There are a few puzzles that are extremely annoying, such as the one you need to do before fighting Giganto on Kronos Island, and the pinball minigame, which has an insanely high point requirement. I do think that most of the other stuff that fans would find annoying I just see as difficult. While those moments upset me, what usually comes after makes up for it.
Some minigames also feel either too short and boring or annoying to play through, but they aren't all bad. It has some interesting minigames, not all of them are the greatest, but they are something new and a nice pace breaker. Usually I'm a sucker for minigames, but I didn't like a few of them. It felt like maybe a few of them didn't have a lot of thought put into them. Like breaking up crates and collecting all the cogs and gears. It was a good platforming challenge, sure, but I didn't like how boring it was or being on such a tight time limit. I guess while the grave puzzle technically wasn't a minigame, it was different from typical gameplay and not in a good way. Not only did it show up unexpectedly, but it was necessary to complete in order to move forward with the game. It was frustrating and often required a reset if things weren't looking right. I did eventually figure it out, but it just seemed like a giant waste of time and way too complicated to even be bothered with. Even so, most of the minigames aren't bad, just could have been a bit more fun.
Since I played the game on release day, I'm able to compare how it released and how the game is now, and it has become a very different game since release. For instance, the spin dash ability completely changes how players interact with the world and traverse it. It dealt with a common complaint many fans had that Sonic's movement felt boring, and makes it so you can now easily fling yourself off of any terrain and truly feel like Sonic. This is the closest we've ever gotten to how Sonic looks in the Sonic CD opening, but this, among other things, should have been added from the very beginning. The game is all about exploration, which is great, but sometimes it's a headache to traverse, especially when the spin dash isn't unlocked until the last island. Because the spin dash isn't unlocked until then, you need to replay the game to experience all it has to offer. The spin dash makes the gameplay much more diverse, convenient, and fun for the player, but the fact it's only unlockable so far into the game is a huge shame.
One thing I also took issue with was how do I explain it? sudden 2D sections in the open world, how the game controls sometimes. The game would go from 3D to 2D very suddenly, and if that wasn't enough, the 2D sections controlled like the cyberspace levels. It annoyed me that the game completely hijacked my camera and made me play something that was akin to the very thing I wasn't all too thrilled about. Rail grinding in general is also a bit iffy. If you boost and try to get off too close to the end of the rail, it straight up launches you off. For the most part, the game controls very well, but there are a few kinks that could be straightened out.
Something I do consider weird about the story is that the side stories for these characters are completely optional. Characters feel way more fleshed out with these, so when a part of their arcs isn't mandatory, it gives some people the idea that these side stories aren't as important. Unfortunately, the ending is also very rushed. During it, Sage explains the mysteries of the game, which may seem unfulfilling since the game is all about doing things yourself and exploring. The base game also just ends very abruptly and it feels very underwhelming. The DLC fixes this, but it has a huge difficulty spike which makes it inaccessible to a lot of players. Moving on, bosses are mostly great, but there are a handful that are extremely annoying. For example, some have you waiting around or complete certain actions before you can finally attack them, and having low attack power will only make these bosses even longer, since if you don't kill them within a certain amount of time or die, you'll have to redo the entire process again. Squid and Sark are good examples of this. Both go on for way too long and force you to wait around before you can finally attack. The final boss of the base game is also very lackluster and not nearly as impactful or fleshed out as the other supersonic bosses. He has much less health, forces you to wait before you can kill him, and even punishes you for trying to parry him. Even the DLC isn't exempt from criticism. It has extremely annoying stuff such as the final Trials boss force, which could have been fun, but the perfect parry mechanic makes it extremely difficult, especially against Wyvern.
Yeah, bosses are very much like the Rush ones, and if you've seen my past videos, you know how much I dislike most of the bosses in Rush. About the final boss though, I just felt very underwhelmed by it. Everything about the other bosses just felt more cinematic and intense, and felt like they could be the final boss of their own game. So for the final boss of the base game to be the way it was disappointing. It just gets completely blown out of the water by all the previous ones. So yeah, despite all the flaws in Frontiers, it doesn't make the game a bad experience. Far from it actually. But there are major differences in how everyone plays games, leading to different experiences, which moves me on to my next point. Everyone's experiences are different, so we're going to share with you how we personally experienced Frontiers, how we felt about it during our initial playthroughs, and after that. I'll go first. Like I said, I play games how I want, and I'm not too great at adapting, dare I say I'm even kinda slow a lot of the time. In Frontiers, I didn't really feel all that mad that I needed to change my playstyle. If anything, I'm glad I had to adapt. It was a nice change of pace, and I honestly started having way more fun after exploring more of what the game had to offer. So yeah, I didn't always understand how the game worked either, but I talked to Jayrock to get a second opinion and decided to take what he said and apply it the best I could. Everything felt smooth, and honestly, it was fun to see Sonic be a menace. The only time we got a taste of that was in Forests and... yeah. Frontiers is also probably the best controlling 3D Sonic game. It actually feels like Sonic is fast outside of levels.
I also think that the game is good as it is. It's rough around the edges with a huge lack of polish, but a huge step in the right direction. I've always wanted an open world Sonic game where I can truly explore the world at the speed of sound, and Frontiers was a title to do that with. This game is very fun when I'm exploring the open world with Spin Dash or trying to speedrun the cyberspace levels. And while at first I did have my complaints with the game, I've grown to enjoy the game much more, and it is truly one of my favorite Sonic titles so far. Some of my favorite 3D Sonic games are Unleashed, Generations, and Colors, and Frontiers is definitely up there with them despite being a very different experience.
Speaking of different, cyberspace levels might have felt weird to control, but it was something I was able to somewhat adapt to.
The spin dash being unlocked and the jump deceleration slider being introduced made cyberspace much more bearable. But as I've already said, it was definitely the low point of the game. They're not great upon a first playthrough and will seriously need time to grow on you in order for it to be even tolerable. But I find a lot of the levels still very fun.
Oh, there's also so much to do, and it helps the game feel a lot more entertaining too. Things like the fishing portals are a good change of pace. It's calming, it was often what kept me from going insane sometimes. It was also a good way to skip anything I was having trouble with, and it's not like fishing is boring. It was honestly kinda charming, and like the mini games gave me something to do outside of typical gameplay.
White, The fishing portals also have the egg memos and scrolls, which is a great addition since it gives people a good reason to fish even if they don't have any trouble with the game's content or care to skip anything. I didn't care much for the fishing personally since I didn't want to skip any part of the game, but the egg memos made it very worth it.
Like I mentioned before, bosses are hit or miss, typical Sonic boss fashion. I personally liked Sumo and Spider. They both felt intuitive and dramatic, especially since you can mostly go at your own pace.
The supersonic bosses were the highlight of the game in my opinion. All of them were fun, fast-paced, and always engaging for the player. It never feels like a dull moment while playing them and definitely made me feel like a badass.
I also thought the story was interesting, and the character interactions were sweet and endearing. It really helped them feel more aged up.
The story in Sonic Frontiers was pretty surprising to see for the first time around. The stories in most of the previous Sonic games feel like they barely had any substance. It also feels great for a long-time player to finally hear all these interactions and understand the references. Like I said before, these references are important, and it makes each game's story, specifically Frontiers, feel way more impactful.
That's just how we experienced the game though. I'm sure everyone else has their own opinions on the game, so I'd love to know what you think. Sonic Frontiers is a game I didn't know if I'd like or not based on some of the things said about it. I'm glad I was able to find the beauty in the game and understand it, even if it has some flaws here and there.
I can't wait to see what the next mainline title has in store, because if it's anything like Frontiers, it'll definitely be an amazing game.
I'd love to hear any experiences people had with this game, even if they don't mirror my own. Also, make sure to sub to Jayrock. He makes amazing animations and deserves the support. We hope you enjoyed the video. This is MPG, I'll catch you later. Peace!